Mean. Look, I didn't start out being mean. I mean, I'm not a mean kid. Sure, sometimes I make jokes, but they're not mean jokes. They're just teasing jokes. People have to lighten up a little. Okay, maybe sometimes my jokes are a little mean, but I only make those jokes behind someone's back. I never say stuff to anyone's face that will actually hurt someone. I'm not a bully like that. I'm not a hater, dude. Attention, people, stop being so sensitive. Some people totally got the whole Photoshop thing, and some didn't. Henry and Miles thought it was so cool and wanted my mom to email their moms the photo. Amos thought it was weird. Charlotte completely disapproved. I don't know what Jack thought because he had gone over to the dark side by now. It's like he totally abandoned his peeps this year and only hangs out with Auggie now, which bugged me because that meant I couldn't hang out with him anymore. No way was I going to catch the plague from that freak. That was the name of the game I invented, the plague. It was simple. If you touched Auggie and you didn't wash off the contamination, you died. Everyone in the whole grade played, except Jack. And Summer. So here's the thing. I've known Summer since we were in 3rd grade, and I never really paid any attention to her, but this year, Henry started liking Savannah, and they were like going out. Now, by going out, I don't mean like high school stuff, which would be kind of gross, barf, disgusting. All it means when you're going out is that you hang out together and meet each other at the lockers and sometimes go to the ice cream shop on Amesfort Avenue after school. So first Henry started going out with Savannah, and then Miles started going out with Jimena, and I was like, yo, what about me? And then Amos said, I'm going to ask Summer out. And I was like, no way, I'm asking her out. So that's when I started kind of liking Summer. But it totally bit that Summer, like Jack, was on Team Auggie. It meant I couldn't hang out with her at all. I couldn't even say what's up to her because the freak might think I was talking to him or something. So I told Henry to have Savannah invite Summer to the Halloween party at her house. I figured I could hang out with her and maybe even ask her to go out with me. That didn't work though because she ended up leaving the party early, and ever since then, she's been spending all her time with the freak. Okay. I know it's not nice to call him the freak, but like I said before, people have to start being a little less sensitive around here. It's only a joke, everyone. Don't take me so seriously. I'm not being mean, I'm just being funny. And that's all I was doing, being totally funny, the day that Jack Will punched me. I had been totally joking, fooling around. I didn't see it coming at all. The way I remember it, we were just goofing together, and all of a sudden he whacks me in the mouth for no reason. Boom! And I was like, ow, you crazy jerk face. You punched me. You actually punched me? And the next thing I know, I'm in Nurse Molly's office holding one of my teeth in my hand, and Mr. Tushman is there, and I hear him on the phone with my mom saying they're taking me to the hospital. I could hear my mom screaming on the other end of the line. Then Ms. Rubin, the dean, is leading me into the back of an ambulance, and we're on the way to the hospital. Crazy stuff. When we were riding in the ambulance, Miss Rubin asked me if I knew why Jack hit me. I was like, duh, because he's totally insane. Not that I could talk much because my lips were swollen and there was blood all over my mouth. Miss Rubin stayed with me in the hospital until Mom showed up. Mom was more than a little hysterical, as you can imagine. She was crying kind of dramatically every time she saw my face. It was, I have to admit, a little embarrassing. Then Dad showed up. Who did this? Was the first thing he said, shouting at Miss Rubin. Jack Will, answered Miss Rubin calmly. He's with Mr. Tushman now. Jack Will? Cried Mom in shock. We know the Wills. How could that happen? There will be a thorough investigation, answered Miss Rubin. Right now, what's most important is that Julian's going to be fine. Fine? Yelled Mom. Look at his face. Do you think that's fine? I don't think that's fine. This is outrageous. What kind of school is this? I thought kids didn't punch each other at a school like Beecher Prep. I thought that's why we pay $40,000 a year, so that our kids don't get hurt. Mrs. Alban, said Ms. Rubin. I know you're upset. I'm assuming the kid will get expelled, right? Said Dad. Dad, I yelled. We will definitely deal with this matter in the appropriate way, I promise, answered Miss Rubin, trying to keep her voice calm. And now, if you don't mind, I think I'll leave you guys alone for a bit. The doctor will be back and you can check in with him, but he said that nothing was broken. Julian's fine. He lost a lower first molar, but that was on its way out anyway. He's going to give him some pain medication, and you should keep icing it. Let's talk more in the morning. It was only then that I realized that poor Miss Rubin's blouse and skirt were completely covered in my blood. Boy, mouths do bleed a lot. Later that night, when I could finally talk again without it hurting, Mom and Dad wanted to know every detail of what had happened, starting with what Jack and I had been talking about right before he hit me. Jack was upset because he was paired up with the deformed kid, I answered. I told him he could switch partners if he wanted to, and then he punched me. Mom shook her head. That was it for her. She was literally madder than I have ever seen her before, and I've seen my mom pretty mad before, believe me. This is what happens, Jules, she said to Dad, crossing her arms and nodding quickly. This is what happens when you make little kids deal with issues they're not equipped to deal with. They're just too young to be exposed to this kind of stuff. That Tushman is an idiot. And she said a whole bunch of other things too, but those are kind of too inappropriate, if you know what I mean, for me to repeat. But Dad, I don't want Jack to get expelled from school, I said later on in the night. He was putting more ice on my mouth because the painkiller they had given me at the hospital was wearing off. That's not up to us, he answered. But I wouldn't trouble myself about it if I were you. Whatever happens, Jack will get what he deserves for this. I have to admit, I started feeling kind of bad for Jack. I mean, sure, he was a total dipstick for punching me, and I wanted him to get in trouble, but I really didn't want him to get kicked out of school or anything. But Mom, I could tell, was on one of her missions now, as Dad would say. She gets like that sometimes when she gets so outraged about something that there's just no stopping her. She was like that a few years ago when a kid got hit by a car a couple of blocks away from Beecher Prep, and she had like 1 million people sign a petition to have a traffic light installed. That was a super mom moment. She was also like that last month when our favorite restaurant changed its menu and they no longer made my favorite dish the way I liked it. That was another super mom moment because after she talked to the new owner, they agreed to special order the dish just for me. But Mom also gets like that for not so nice stuff. Like when a waiter messes up a food order, that's a not so super mom moment because, well, it can get kind of weird when your mom starts talking to a waiter like he's 5 years old. Awkward. Also, like Dad says, you don't want to get a waiter mad at you. They have your food in their hands, duh. So I wasn't totally clear on how I felt when I realized that my mom was declaring war on Mr. Tushman, Augie Pullman, and all of Beecher Prep. Was it going to be a supermom moment or a not so supermom moment? Like, would it end up with Augie going to a different school? Yay! Or with Mr. Tushman blowing his nose in my cafeteria food? Ooh. Party. It took about 2 weeks for the swelling to go completely down. Because of that, we ended up not going to Paris over winter break. Mom didn't want our relatives to see me looking like I'd been in a prize fight. She also wouldn't take any pictures of me over the holidays because she said she didn't want to remember me looking like that. For our annual Christmas card, we used one of the rejects from last year's photo shoot. Even though I wasn't having a lot of nightmares anymore, the fact that I had started having nightmares again really worried Mom. I could tell she was totally stressed out about it. Then, the day before our Christmas party, she found out from one of the other moms that Augie had not been through the same kind of admissions screening that the rest of us had been. See, every kid who applies to Beecher Prep is supposed to be interviewed and take a test at the school, but some kind of exception had been made for Augie. He didn't have to come to the school for the interview, and he got to take the admissions test at home. Mom thought that was really unfair. This kid should not have gotten into that school, I heard her telling a group of other moms at the party. Beecher Prep is just not set up to handle situations like this. We're not an inclusion school. We don't have the psychologists needed to deal with how it affects the other kids. Poor Julian had nightmares for a whole month. Ugh, Mom. I hate your telling people about my nightmares. Henry was upset as well, Henry's mom said, and the other moms nodded. They didn't even prepare us beforehand, Mom went on. That's what gets me the most. If they're not going to provide additional psychological support, at least warn the parents ahead of time. Absolutely, said Miles's mom, and the other moms nodded again. Obviously, Jack Will could have used some therapy, Mom said, rolling her eyes. I was surprised they didn't expel him, said Henry's mom. Oh, they would have, answered Mom, but we asked them not to. We've known the Will family since kindergarten. They're good people. We don't blame Jack, really. I think he just cracked under the pressure of having to be this kid's caretaker. That's what happens when you put little kids into these kinds of situations. I honestly don't know what Tushman was thinking. I'm sorry. I just have to step in here, said another mom. I think it was Charlotte's mom because she had the same bright blonde hair and big blue eyes. It's not like there's anything wrong with this kid, Melissa. He's a great kid who just happens to look different. But, oh, I know, Mom answered, and she put her hand over her heart. Oh, Bridget, no one's saying he's not a great kid, believe me. I'm sure he is, and I hear the parents are lovely people. That's not the issue. To me, ultimately, the simple fact of the matter is that Tushman didn't follow protocol. He flagrantly disregarded the applications process by not having the boy come to Beecher Prep for the interview or take the test like every one of our kids did. He broke the rules. And rules are rules. That's it. Mom made a sad face at Bridget. Oh, dear Bridget, I can see you totally disapprove. No, Melissa, not at all, Charlotte's mom said, shaking her head. It's a tough situation all around. Look, the fact is, your son got punched in the face. You have every right to feel angry and demand some answers. Thank you, Mom nodded and crossed her arms. I just think the whole thing's been handled terribly, that's all, and I blame Tushman completely. Absolutely, said Henry's mom. He's got to go, agreed Miles's mom. I looked at Mom, surrounded by nodding moms, and I thought, okay, so maybe this is going to turn out to be one of those really super mom moments. Maybe everything she was doing would make it so that Auggie ended up going to a different school, and then things could go back to the way it used to be at Beecher Prep. That would be so awesome. But a part of me was thinking, maybe this is going to turn into a not so super mom moment. I mean, some of the stuff she was saying sounded kind of, I don't know, kind of harsh, I guess. It's like when she gets mad at a waiter. You end up feeling sorry for the waiter. The thing is, I know she's on this anti-Tushman mission because of me. If I hadn't started getting nightmares again, and if Jack hadn't punched me, none of this would be happening. She wouldn't be making a big deal about Auggie or Tushman, and she'd be concentrating all her time and energy on good stuff, like raising money for the school and volunteering at the homeless shelter. Mom does good stuff like that all the time. So I don't know. On the one hand, I'm happy she's trying to help me, and on the other hand, I would love for her to stop. Team Julian. The thing that annoyed me the most when we got back from winter break was that Jack had gone back to being friends with Auggie again. They had some kind of fight after Halloween, which is why Jack and I started being bros again, but after winter break was over, they were best buds again. It was so lame. I told everyone we needed to really ice Jack out for his own good. He had to choose once and for all whether he wanted to be on Team Auggie or Team Julian and the rest of the world. So we started completely ignoring Jack, not talking to him, not answering his questions. It was like he didn't exist. That'll show him. And that's when I started leaving my little notes. One day someone had left some post-it notes on one of the benches in the yard, which is what gave me the idea. I wrote in this really psycho killer handwriting, "Nobody likes you anymore." I slipped it into the slits in Jack's locker when no one was looking. I watched him out of the corner of my eye when he found it. He turned around and saw Henry opening his locker nearby. "Did Julian write this?" he asked. But Henry was one of my peeps, you know. He just iced Jack out, pretended like no one was even talking to him. Jack crumpled the post-it and flicked it into his locker and banged the door shut. After Jack left, I went over to Henry. "Holla," I said, giving him the devil sign, which made Henry laugh. Over the next couple of days, I left a few more notes in Jack's locker, and then I started leaving some in Auggie's locker. They were not, I repeat, not a big deal. They were mostly stupid stuff. I didn't think anyone would ever take them seriously. I mean, they were actually kind of funny. Well, at least some of them were. "You stink, big cheese. Freak. Get out of our school, orc." No one but Miles and Henry knew that I was writing these notes, and they were sworn to secrecy. Dr. Jansen's office. I don't know how the heck Mr. Tushman found out about them. I don't think Jack or Auggie would have been dumb enough to rat on me because they had started leaving me notes in my locker too. I mean, how stupid would you have to be to rat someone out about something that you were doing too? So here's what happened. A few days before the 5th grade nature retreat, which I was totally looking forward to, Mom got a phone call from Dr. Jansen, the headmaster of Beecher Prep. He said he wanted to discuss something with her and Dad and asked for a meeting. Mom assumed it had probably had to do with Mr. Tushman, that maybe he was getting fired, so she was actually kind of excited about the meeting. They showed up for the appointment at 10 a.m., and they were waiting in Dr. Jansen's office when all of a sudden they see me walking into the office too. Miss Rubin had taken me out of class, asked me to follow her, and brought me there. I had no idea what was up. I'd never even been to the headmaster's office before, so when I saw Mom and Dad there, I looked as confused as they were. "What's going on?" Mom said to Miss Rubin before Miss Rubin could say anything. Mr. Tushman and Dr. Jansen came into the office. Everyone shook hands, and they were all smiles as they greeted one another. Miss Rubin said she had to go back to class, but that she would call Mom and Dad later to check in. This surprised Mom. I could tell she started thinking that maybe this wasn't about Mr. Tushman getting fired after all. Then Dr. Jansen asked us to sit on the sofa opposite his desk. Mr. Tushman sat down in a chair next to us, and Dr. Jansen sat behind his desk. "Well, thank you so much for coming, Melissa and Jules," Dr. Jansen said to my parents. It was strange hearing him call them by their first names. I knew they all knew each other from being on the board, but it sounded weird. I know how busy you are, and I'm sure you're wondering what this is all about. Well, yes, said Mom. Her voice drifted off. Dad coughed into his hand. The reason we asked you here today is because, unfortunately, Dr. Jansen continued, we have a serious matter on our hands, and we'd like to figure out the best way to resolve it. Julian, do you have any inkling of what I might be talking about? He looked at me. I opened my eyes wide. Me? I snapped my head back and made a face. No. Dr. Jansen smiled and sighed at the same time. He took off his glasses. You understand, he said, looking at me, we take bullying very seriously at Beecher Prep. There's zero tolerance for any kind of bullying. We feel that every single one of our students deserves the right to learn in a caring and respectful atmosphere. Excuse me, but can someone please tell me what's going on here? Mom interrupted, looking at Dr. Jansen impatiently. We obviously know the mission statement at Beecher Prep, Hal. We practically wrote it. Let's cut to the chase. What's going on? Evidence. Dr. Jansen looked at Mr. Tushman. Why don't you explain, Larry? He said. Mr. Tushman handed an envelope to Mom and Dad. Mom opened it and pulled out the last 3 Post-it notes I had left in Augie's locker. I knew immediately that's what they were, because they were actually pink Post-its and not yellow ones like all the others had been. So I thought, aha, so it was Auggie who told Mr. Tushman about the Post-it notes. What a turd. Mom read through the notes quickly, raised her eyebrows, and passed them to Dad. He read them and looked at me. You wrote these, Julian? He said, holding the notes out for me. I swallowed. I looked at him kind of blankly. He handed me the notes and I just stared at them. Well, I answered, yeah, I guess. But Dad, they were writing notes too. Who was writing notes? Asked Dad. Jack and Auggie, I answered. They were writing notes to me too. It wasn't just me. But you started the note writing, didn't you? Asked Mr. Tushman. Excuse me, Mom interjected angrily. Let's not forget that it was Jack Will who punched Julian in the mouth, not the other way around. Obviously, there's going to be residual anger. How many of these notes did you write, Julian? Dad interrupted, tapping on the Post-its I was holding. I don't know. I said it was hard for me to get the words out, like 6 or something. But the other ones weren't this, bad. These notes are worse than the others I wrote. The other ones weren't so. My voice kind of drifted off as I reread what I'd written on the 3 notes. Yo, Darth Hideous, you're so ugly you should wear a mask every day. And I hate you, freak. And the last one, I bet your mother wishes you'd never been born. You should do everybody a favor and die. Of course, looking at them now, they seemed a lot worse than when I wrote them, but I was mad then, super mad. I had just gotten one of their notes and, wait, I said, and I reached in my pocket. I found the last Post-it that Auggie and Jack had left for me in my locker just yesterday. It was kind of crumpled up now, but I held it out to Mr. Tushman to read. Look, they wrote mean stuff too. Mr. Tushman took the Post-it, read it quickly, and handed it to my parents. My mom read it and then looked at the floor. My dad read it and shook his head puzzled. He handed me the Post-it, and I reread it. Julian, you're so hot. Summer doesn't like you, but I want to have your babies. Smell my armpits. Love, Beulah. Who the heck is Beulah? Asked Dad. Never mind, I answered. I can't explain. I handed the Post-it back to Mr. Tushman, who gave it to Dr. Jansen to read. I noticed he actually tried to hide a smile. Julian, said Mr. Tushman, the 3 notes you wrote don't compare at all to the content in this note. I don't think it's for anyone else to judge the semantics of a note, said Mom. It doesn't matter whether you think one note is worse than the other. It's how the person reading the note reads it. The fact is, Julian's had a little crush on this summer girl all year long, and it probably hurt his feelings. Mom, I yelled, and I covered my face with my hands. That's so embarrassing. All I'm saying is that a note can be hurtful to a child, whether you see it or not, Mom said to Mr. Tushman. Are you kidding me? Answered Mr. Tushman, shaking his head. He sounded angrier than I had ever heard him before. Are you telling me you don't find the Post-its your son wrote completely horrifying? Because I do. I'm not defending the notes, answered Mom. I'm just reminding you that it was a 2-way street. You have to realize that Julian was obviously writing those notes as a reaction to something. Look, said Dr. Jansen, holding his hand out in front of him like a crossing guard, there's no doubt there's some history here. Those notes hurt my feelings, I said, and I didn't mind that I sounded like I was going to cry. I don't doubt that their notes hurt your feelings, Julian, Dr. Jansen answered, and you were trying to hurt their feelings. That's the problem with stuff like this. Everyone keeps trying to top one another, and then things escalate out of control. Exactly, said Mom, and it almost sounded like she screamed it. But the fact is, Dr. Jansen continued, holding up his finger, there is a line, Julian. There is a line, and your notes crossed that line. They're completely unacceptable. If Auggie had read these notes, how do you think he'd feel? He was looking at me so intensely that I felt like disappearing under the sofa. You mean he hasn't read them? I asked. No, answered Dr. Jansen. Thank goodness someone reported the notes to Mr. Tushman yesterday, and he opened Augie's locker and intercepted them before Auggie ever saw them. I nodded and lowered my head. I have to admit I was glad Auggie hadn't read them. I guess I knew what Dr. Jansen meant about crossing the line, but then I thought, so if it wasn't Auggie who ratted me out, who was it? We were all quiet for a minute or two. It was awkward beyond belief. The verdict. Okay, said Dad, finally rubbing his palm over his face. Obviously, we understand the seriousness of the situation now, and we will do something about it. I don't think I'd ever seen Dad look so uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Dad. Well, we have some recommendations, answered Dr. Jansen. Obviously, we want to help everyone involved. Thank you for understanding, said Mom, getting her pocketbook ready as if she were getting up. But there are consequences, said Mr. Tushman, looking at Mom. Excuse me? She shot back at him. As I said in the beginning, Dr. Jansen interjected, the school has a very strict anti-bullying policy. Yeah, we saw how strict it was when you didn't expel Jack Will for punching Julian in the mouth, Mom answered quickly. Yeah, take that, Mr. Tushman. Oh, come on, that was completely different, Mr. Tushman answered dismissively. Oh, answered Mom, punching someone in the face isn't bullying to you? Okay, said Dad, raising his hand to keep Mr. Tushman from answering. Let's just cut to the chase, okay? What exactly are your recommendations, Hal? Dr. Jansen looked at him. Julian is being suspended for 2 weeks, he said. What? Yelled Mom, looking at Dad, but Dad didn't look back. In addition, said Dr. Jansen, we're recommending counseling. Nurse Molly has the names of several therapists who we think Julian should see. This is outrageous, interrupted Mom, steaming. Wait, I said, you mean I can't go to school? Not for 2 weeks, answered Mr. Tushman, starting immediately. But what about the trip to the nature retreat? I asked. You can't go, he answered coldly. No, I said, and now I really was about to cry. I want to go to the nature retreat. I'm sorry, Julian, said Dr. Jansen gently. This is absolutely ridiculous, said Mom, looking at Dr. Jansen. Don't you think you're overreacting a little? That kid didn't even read the notes. That's not the point, answered Mr. Tushman. I'll tell you what I think, said Mom. This is because you admitted a kid into the school who shouldn't have been admitted into the school in the first place, and you broke the rules to do it, and now you're just taking this out on my kid because I'm the one who had the guts to call you on it. Melissa, said Dr. Jansen, trying to calm her down. These children are too young to deal with things like this. Facial deformities, disfigurement, Mom continued, talking to Dr. Jansen. You must see that. Julian's had nightmares because of that boy. Did you know that? Julian has anxiety issues. Mom, I said through clenched teeth. The board should have been consulted about whether Beecher Prep was the right place for a child like that, Mom continued. That's all I'm saying. We're just not set up for it. There are other schools that are, but we're not. You can choose to believe that if you want, answered Mr. Tushman, not looking at her. Mom rolled her eyes. This is a witch hunt, she muttered quietly, looking out the window. She was fuming. I had no idea what she was talking about. Witches? What witches? Okay, Hal, you said you had some recommendations, Dad said to Dr. Jansen. He sounded gruff. Is that it? 2 weeks suspension and counseling? We'd also like for Julian to write a letter of apology to August Pullman, said Mr. Tushman. Apology for what exactly? Answered Mom. He wrote some stupid notes. Surely he's not the only kid in the world who's ever written a stupid note. It's more than a stupid note, answered Mr. Tushman. It's a pattern of behavior. He started counting on his fingers. It's the making faces behind the kid's back. It's the game he initiated, where if someone touches Auggie, he has to wash his hands. I couldn't believe Mr. Tushman even knew about the plague. How do teachers know so much? It's social isolation, Mr. Tushman continued. It's creating a hostile atmosphere. And you know for a fact that it's Julian who initiated all this? Asked Dad. Social isolation, hostile atmosphere? Are you saying that Julian was the only kid who wasn't nice to this boy? Or are you suspending every kid who stuck his tongue out at this kid? Good one, Dad. Score 1 for the Albanses. Doesn't it trouble you at all that Julian doesn't seem to be showing the least bit of remorse? Said Mr. Tushman, squinting at Dad. Okay, let's just stop right there, Dad said quietly, pointing his finger in Mr. Tushman's face. Please, everyone, said Dr. Jansen, let's calm down a bit. Obviously, this is difficult. After all we've done for this school, Mom answered, shaking her head. After all the money and the time we've put into this school, you would think we'd get just a little bit of consideration." She put her thumb and her index finger together. "Just a little." Dad nodded. He was still looking angrily at Mr. Tushman, but then he looked at Dr. Jansen. "Melissa's right," he said. "I think we deserved a little better than this, Hal. A friendly warning would have been nice. Instead, you call us in here like children." He stood up. "We deserved better." "I'm sorry you feel that way," said Dr. Jansen, standing up as well. "The Board of Trustees will hear about this," said Mom, and she got up too. "I'm sure they will," answered Dr. Jansen, crossing his arms and nodding. Mr. Tushman was the only adult still sitting down. "The point of the suspension isn't punitive," he said quietly. "We're trying to help Julian, too. He can't fully understand the ramifications of his actions if you keep trying to justify them away. We want him to feel some empathy." "You know, I've heard just about enough," said Mom, holding her palm in front of Mr. Tushman's face. "I don't need parenting advice, not from someone who doesn't have kids of his own. You don't know what it's like to see your kid having a panic attack every time he shuts his eyes to go to sleep, okay? You don't know what it's like." Her voice cracked a bit, like she was going to cry. She looked at Dr. Jansen. "This affected Julian deeply, Hal. I'm sorry if that's not politically correct to say, but it's the truth, and I'm just trying to do what I think is best for my son, that's all. Do you understand?" "Yes, Melissa," Dr. Jansen answered softly. Mom nodded. Her chin quivered. "Are we done here? Can we go now?" "Sure," he answered. "Come on, Julian," she said, and she walked out of the office. I stood up. I admit I wasn't exactly sure what was going on. "Wait, is that it?" I asked. "But what about my things? All my stuff's in my locker." "Ms. Rubin will get your things ready, and she'll get them to you later this week," answered Dr. Jansen. He looked at Dad. "I'm really sorry it came to this, Jules." He held out his hand for a handshake. Dad looked at his hand, but didn't shake it. He looked at Dr. Jansen. "Here's the only thing I want from you, Hal," he said quietly. "I want that all of this, be kept confidential. Is that clear? It doesn't go beyond this room. I don't want Julian turned into some kind of anti-bullying poster boy by the school. No one is to know why he's been suspended. We'll make up some excuse about why he's not in school, and that's it. Are we clear, Hal? I don't want him made into an example. I'm not going to stand by while this school drags my family's reputation through the mud. Oh, by the way, in case I hadn't mentioned it before, Dad's a lawyer." Dr. Jansen and Mr. Tushman exchanged looks. "We're not looking to make an example of any of our students," Dr. Jansen answered. "The suspension really is about a reasonable response to unreasonable behavior." "Give me a break," answered Dad, looking at his watch. "It's a massive overreaction." Dr. Jansen looked at Dad, and then he looked at me. "Julian," he said, looking me right in the eye, "can I ask you something point blank?" I looked at Dad, who nodded. I shrugged. "Do you feel at all remorseful for what you've done?" Dr. Jansen asked me. I thought about it for a second. I could tell all the grown-ups were watching me, waiting for me to answer something magical that would make this whole situation better. "Yes," I said quietly. "I'm really sorry I wrote those last notes." Dr. Jansen nodded. "Is there anything else you feel remorse for?" he asked. I looked at Dad again. I'm not an idiot. I knew what he was dying for me to say. I just wasn't going to say it, so I looked down and shrugged. "Can I ask you this then?" said Dr. Jansen. "Will you consider writing Auggie a letter of apology?" I shrugged again. "How many words does it have to be?" was all I could think to say. I knew the moment I said it that I probably shouldn't have. Dr. Jansen looked at my dad, who just looked down. "Julian," said Dad, "go find Mom. Wait for me by the reception area. I'll be out in a second." Just as I closed the door on my way out, Dad started whispering something to Dr. Jansen and Mr. Tushman. It was a hushed, angry whisper. When I got to the reception area, I found Mom sitting on a chair with her sunglasses on. I sat down next to her. She rubbed my back, but she didn't say anything. I think she had been crying. I looked at the clock, 10:20 a.m. Right about now, Ms. Rubin was probably going over the results of yesterday's quiz in science class. As I looked around the lobby, I had a blip of a memory. That day before school started, when me, Jack, Will, and Charlotte had met here before meeting our welcome buddy for the first time. I remember how nervous Jack had been that day and how I didn't even know who Auggie was. So much has happened since then. Out of school. Dad didn't say anything when he met us in the lobby. We just walked out the doors without saying goodbye, even to the security guard at the reception area. It was weird leaving the school when everyone was still inside. I wondered what Miles and Henry would think when I didn't come back to class. I hated that I was going to miss PE that afternoon. My parents were quiet the whole way back to the house. We live on the Upper West Side, which is about a half-an-hour drive from Beecher Prep, but it felt like it took forever to get home. I can't believe I got suspended. I said just as we pulled into the parking garage in our building. It's not your fault, honey, answered Mom. They have it in for us. Melissa, Dad yelled, which surprised Mom a bit. Yes, of course it's his fault. This whole situation is his fault. Julian, what the heck were you thinking writing notes like that? He was goaded into writing them, answered Mom. We had pulled to a stop inside the garage. The parking garage attendant was waiting for us to get out of the car, but we didn't get out. Dad turned around and looked at me. I'm not saying I think the school handled this right, he said. 2 weeks suspension is ridiculous. But Julian, you should know better. I know, I said. It was a mistake, Dad. We all make mistakes, said Mom. Dad turned around. He looked at Mom. Jansen's right, Melissa. If you keep trying to justify his actions, that's not what I'm doing, Jules. Dad didn't answer right away. Then he said, I told Jansen that we're pulling Julian out of Beecher Prep next year. Mom was literally speechless. It took a second for what he said to hit me. You what? I said. Jules, Mom said slowly. I told Jansen that we'll finish out this year at Beecher Prep, Dad continued calmly. But next year, Julian's going to a different school. I can't believe this, I cried. I love Beecher Prep, Dad. I have friends. Mom! I'm not sending you back to that school, Julian, Dad said firmly. No way am I spending another dime on that school. There are plenty of other great private schools in New York City. Mom, I said. Mom wiped her hand across her face. She shook her head. Don't you think we should have talked about this first? She said to Dad. You don't agree? He countered. She rubbed her forehead with her fingers. No, I do agree, she said softly, nodding. Mom, I screamed. She turned around in her seat. Honey, I think Daddy's right. I can't believe this, I yelled, punching the car seat. They have it in for us now, she continued, because we complained about the situation with that boy. But that was your fault, I said through clenched teeth. I didn't tell you to try and get Auggie thrown out of school. I didn't want you to get Tushman fired. That was you. And I'm sorry about that, sweetheart, she said meekly. Julian, said Dad, your mom did everything she did to try and protect you. It's not her fault you wrote those notes, is it? No, but if she hadn't made such a big stink about everything, I started to say. Julian, do you hear yourself, said Dad. Now you're blaming your mom? Before you were blaming the other boys for writing those notes. I'm starting to wonder if what they were saying is right. Don't you feel any remorse for what you've done? Of course he does, said Mom. Melissa, let him answer for himself, Dad said loudly. No, okay, I yelled. I'm not sorry. I know everybody thinks I should be all, I'm sorry for being mean to Auggie. I'm sorry I talked smack about him. I'm sorry I dissed him, but I'm not. So sue me. Before Dad could respond, the garage attendant knocked on the car window. Another car had pulled into the garage, and they needed us to get out.